Welcome to another comment response video. You can skip to a topic using the timestamps below. If you have any questions for a future video, you can leave them in the comments. Everything the Drug Classroom does is supported by donations. If you want to help out, please consider supporting on Patreon. How problematic would using under 20 milligrams of amphetamine twice per week be? So long as you're actually using amphetamine, this kind of use won't be much of an issue. Physical dependence doesn't really form with 2 uses per week, so you should be able to stick with the same dose. And your physical health isn't at risk if you're otherwise healthy. Just make sure to keep up with eating, drinking, and sleep. Some of the biggest issues with moderate use come from using drugs to avoid sleep. Tons of people rely on them to pull all-nighters or to overcome sleep deprivation, but it's best to use stimulants on top of a healthy lifestyle. Otherwise, the additional stress on your body and mind may catch up with you. But at that point, it's not really the drug's fault. I'm curious what your ideal drug policy would be. If America does legalize all drugs, how do you think we should go about it? Should they be sold everywhere and be available to everyone? Or should there be regulations? And do you agree with mandatory education for consumers? My biggest concern when it comes to policy is making sure drugs are legal. Any form of legalization is better than prohibition, whether that's a totally free market or state-run stores with mandatory education for buyers. I lean towards a free market due to my political philosophy, but I'm fine with some regulations. Those include an age requirement of 18 and mandatory labeling with safety information. I don't believe in mandatory adult education courses, but I would like to see harm reduction in schools starting at a pretty young age. Much like sex education, I think drug education in the form of schooling and public information campaigns is important. Unnecessarily high prices from sin taxes or price controls can make addictions worse and create black markets. So I think price controls are best avoided and sin taxes should either not exist or be as low as possible so that unintended consequences don't appear. When it comes to state and local licensing for businesses, like the liquor license system, I haven't formed an opinion. In general, any significant regulations at the federal level are suspect from a constitutional perspective. Just as prohibition can be opposed on constitutional grounds, so can certain regulations if you take an originalist view of the Commerce Clause. But if we're going to have regulations, the limited ones I mentioned seem reasonable. We're so far beyond the most restrictive interpretation of the Constitution that we may as well use the government's power to institute a few worthwhile regulations. I'm still figuring out my opinion on the variety of laws that may exist when prohibition ends. Hi, why don't you make a video about heroin? As with any psychoactive drug, I will cover heroin, and I know it's been heavily requested. Since I'm just a single individual working on this project, and research takes a while, I can't release content as fast as I'd like, but rest assured, heroin will be discussed, and I'll try not to make everyone wait another year to see that video. You can't even OD on Kratom. If you took way too much, you'll feel nauseous. We don't know for sure Kratom is safe at high doses, but it does appear pretty safe in overdose. Mitragynine and 7-hydroxymitragynine are the active drugs that get the most attention. They function as opioids, but they're pretty unique. They take advantage of functional selectivity, meaning a drug's ability to differentially affect intracellular signaling pathways. Not all agonists or drugs that activate a G-protein coupled receptor will do the same thing. Multiple signaling pathways are associated with receptors, and they're believed to be responsible for different effects. In the case of the mu-opioid receptor, some pathways seem to mediate pain relief, while others mediate respiratory depression, constipation, and tolerance. Morphine and typical opioids aren't clearly biased with respect to intracellular signaling, so although they're good for improving your mood or relieving pain, they can severely reduce breathing if you take too much. The evidence suggests mitragynine and 7-hydroxymitragynine are more selective. Physical dependence does not form as fast, and their ability to cause respiratory depression is lower. This has been attributed to differential effects on a couple pathways, namely G-protein pathways and the beta-arrestin 2 pathway. Typical opioids activate both, but Kratom's main drugs are biased away from beta-arrestin 2, and that seems to come with beneficial effects. Functional selectivity could be the reason Kratom offers a better profile in overdose. overdose. As you noted, severe nausea followed by vomiting is protective as well, but it's not impossible to pass out from kratom and die from vomit aspiration. Rapid withdrawal causes all the problems the drug is professionally prescribed to affect. This was from my overview of quetiapine. Many drugs, both pharmaceuticals and illicit drugs, are criticized because of physical dependence, but the existence of withdrawal does not mean a drug is bad. Dependence, the main source of tolerance and withdrawal, happens with a ton of substances. It tells you almost nothing about whether something is worth taking. If you don't need to use something all the time, it's a reason to avoid daily use. But the potential for your body to become dependent on a drug, like quetiapine, does not mean you should avoid it. Withdrawal is a major limitation with psychoactive substances. It varies in severity, but even with some pharmaceuticals, it can be very unpleasant. And yes, typically withdrawal will come with symptoms of whatever condition you took the drug to treat. So, if you have an anti-anxiety drug, you could be anxious or agitated when you come off. With quetiapine, some of the symptoms include insomnia, restlessness, sweating, anxiety, and nausea. These can sometimes be reduced by slowly tapering. Tapering lets your body adjust to a different amount of the drug rather than abruptly stopping and giving your body no chance to adjust. But even with tapering, you may initially feel unpleasant when stopping a medication like quetiapine. It's good to bring up this concern to your physician so that you not only have a plan for being on the medication, but a plan for coming off when the time is right. Because these withdrawal symptoms can be concerning to patients, I think physicians should spend more time explaining them before someone ever starts a prescription. Otherwise, a patient can be blindsided by significant negative effects when they want to come off, which doesn't help them or the drug's reputation. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments. The Drug Classroom is only funded by donations. This content is possible due to listener support. If you want to support, you can do so through Patreon, PayPal, or Bitcoin.